Well, the first time I ever laid eyes on Donna Crumpler, I gotta tell you, I'm very right-brained. She's very left-brained. I was so intimidated. And I listened to her talk about her successful business and the decisions that she was making, and that's the only part of her life I knew was, her as a successful businesswoman. And I was just so impressed and just so blessed by everything she was accomplishing and what she had done. And so one day, she was moving, and so I said, do you need anything? You need any help? And she said, well, if you want to, you can come over and help me kind of rearrange things and put things away. I said, oh, I'd love to. And that day, I got to know Donna Crumpler. There was a picture, and I asked her about the picture. And then she tells me about the horrendous childhood she had had. And I saw her through totally different eyes, because you talk about fulfilling your destiny of greatness. It just reminded me of so many characters in the Bible, the people who were starting with nothing, and God used them so profoundly. And I got to have an even greater respect and appreciation for her. And I count her as one of my greatest gifts in my life, to know her. She truly is a woman of value. I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Donna Crumpler Minor.
Thank you. Thank you. I usually say that it's not a good meeting unless somebody cries. And I'm usually the first one. So I am truly honored by your words and thoughts, Renee. Thank each of you for coming. When you hear my story, I think you'll understand why I often would think, why would somebody want to come and hear me? Why would somebody want to be my friend? I know that each of you had something else you could have done today, some other way you could have spent your money. So thank you for coming. I am truly honored. Ever been in a situation where you thought, Lord, what good could come out of this? Let me share a few stories with you that are my greatest blessings. In April of 2001, a business group that I was a part of invited me to a Easter play at West End Assembly God called The Master's Plan. I saw one thumb back there. Anybody seen it? Okay, wonderful. Of course, I immediately declined. I told them that I had been to several Easter plays. I knew how they began and I knew how they ended. I had been raised in church, and I didn't go to church because I was a good person. I now realize that good has too many O's in it. We need to be godly, not good. So I told them I wasn't going. They insisted that I go, and since I'd been sitting at home with a knee operation by myself for 6 weeks and bored out of my mind, they even offered to throw in dinner. And guess what won out? The dinner. So off to the play I went, and that was in April of 2001. In May, on Mother's Day, my brother was killed in an automobile accident. At his funeral, the preacher talked about no matter what happened in his life, he always had an anchor. He had struggled since Vietnam with a drug addiction, in and out of rehab a couple of times. He had lost a wife to breast cancer, leaving him with 3 very young, small children. But his anchor was God his church family, and his love of gospel music. As I sat there in my grief, I thought I'd been living my life since 18, kind of according to the Frank Sinatra song, I did it my way. Well, my way had got me a divorce with 2 children, a couple of failed relationships, in debt, out of debt, in debt. Oh, I had done a great job of doing it my way. The reality of no God, no anchor, it hit me. The next Sunday, I went back to West End Assembly of God and gave my life back to Christ. If it hadn't have been for my brother's death, I would have still been doing it my way. One of the first Bible studies that we had at West End was on the 10 Commandments as a lifestyle. That's pretty simple. I got the first couple of ones. Honor your God, honor the Sabbath, but then came the 5th one, honor your mother. And I said, wait a minute, hold on. How many of you have ever argued with God? Well, I started arguing with God, and I said, wait a minute, God, you can't possibly expect me to follow that one. Honor my mother. See, I had always known my mother never wanted me. I had grown up hearing her say as I would be driven out of the driveway to live with an aunt, a cousin, a grandmother, or even people I didn't really know very well. Keep her as long as you want. I can remember hearing her and her mother, my grandmother, arguing, and her saying to my grandmother, you keep her. You know I don't want her. Years of hurt, years of bitterness, and I'm supposed to honor that? Surely God didn't mean that for me. Well, one day I was shopping. This was after I had given my life back to God, and I found this little plaque. For those of you who are in the back, it's a tin heart kind of split in 2, stitched together with some wire. And I thought, that's kind of my heart, kind of broken in 2, but God's forgiveness and God's love, stitching it back together. Well, came home, and there was a letter for my mother. Now, I had learned a long time ago, be real careful about opening any letter that came from her. I remember one time I got a letter with my baby pictures in it, and it said, I don't have a use for these anymore. Maybe you do. I remember on my 40th birthday, she sent me a birthday card, and inside it was a newspaper article about abortion clinics with a note that said, if these were available 40 years ago, I guess you wouldn't be celebrating today. Happy birthday. So now you can see why I really didn't want to open that letter. But finally the flesh won out, and I decided to open it. This letter, which is addressed to myself and to I have 2 sisters, of which she acknowledges at the bottom that she doesn't know where they are or where their addresses are. And it says, Donna, Kay, and Nanette, this is a letter just to ask for forgiveness. In my anger toward my children, in my eyes they were trying to control me, I became bitter. But in the example of the Lord's Prayer, I must forgive those who have trespassed against me as I have trespassed against them. Can't change anything except to ask for forgiveness. I want to have clean hands and make heaven my home. Not asking for a relationship, just forgive me. Love, Mother. Well, of course, I immediately picked up the phone and called her. We talked about God's forgiveness, God's love. She had given her life to God several years before. We were now on the same page. That letter of forgiveness changed my life. For the next 9 years, we began a journey of forgiveness. We had lunch together. We even took a 3-day trip to the Biltmore in North Carolina. Laughed all the way down because I was using a GPS and she didn't like my GPS. Told me to stop at a 7-Eleven store because she needed a hard copy of a map. She began to take an interest in my children's life, and she got to see a grandchild, a great-grandchild that she had never seen. Out of this horrible situation, I began to have wonderful blessings. Had to wait a long time, but it arrived. See, now I had a mother just like everybody else. And on Mother's Day, I could go to the Hallmark store and buy a Mother's Day card. If you've never gone to a Hallmark store and tried to buy a Mother's Day card knowing you weren't wanted, it ain't easy, because Hallmark don't make those. On my 58th birthday, I received the last birthday gift from my mother. It's a beautiful wall plaque that she had quilted for me. Yeah. With the fruits of the Spirit. 2 years later, I was holding her hand and saw her take her last breath. I spoke at her funeral on the blessings of forgiveness. See, I believe it takes 3 to restore. You can put that right there if you want to. I believe that it takes 3 to restore such a relationship. You got to have 1 to ask, you got to have 1 to accept, and you got to have God as the mediator. Something horrible turned into something so beautiful for me. When Mom and I took the trip to North Carolina, she mentioned to me that she just didn't understand why I couldn't find a good Christian man. Well, I told her she'd probably get to heaven before I did, so she could put in a good word for me. So for many years, this was a joke. When you get to heaven, put in a good word for me. Well, after 8 months, she died, and I put my profile on the internet. Now, some of you may be thinking, ooh, that's kind of risky. I even heard lately that some people were even praying for me that I didn't get into some of those catfish schemes that Dr. Phil talks about. Well, let me tell you, one of the worst blind dates I ever had was arranged by my Christian cousin by somebody that was in her church. But I had my way of screening. One of my requirements was that he had to be a Christian. God already had to do the converting. I wasn't going to do that part of it. Well, one day I saw a profile of a man named John Miner. His profile included pictures of his German Shepherd. In fact, I think he had more pictures of the Shepherd than he did of him. So I emailed him and asked him about the dog. From the time that he responded, his address changed from Chester, Virginia to Milan, New Hampshire. I thought, well, I want to have a Christian, but he's got to live within 75 miles of Richmond, because I absolutely did not want a long-distance relationship. So I immediately asked him why his address had changed. He explained to me that he was working at his brother's flower farm. For those of you who know me, I love to garden. He explained that he was working there for the summer and that he would return back to Chester in August. Well, usually within the first couple of emails or conversations, I would always ask, where do you go to church? See, in my mind, I didn't want a Christian man that warmed a pew a couple of times a year, Christmas and Easter. This man had to serve and be serving in a church. I remember telling my son-in-law some of the questions that I would ask, and his response was, sounds like you're doing a job interview. I laughed and I said, well, listen, being a good Christian husband is an important job, right, Jim? So I remembered asking John where he went to church. And he told me that when he was in Chester, he attended Chester Baptist Church. And if he'd like, he'd even give me a reference and give me the pastor's name. And I thought, yes, a man who comes with a reference from the pastor, gotta be okay. So we talked on the phone and we dated for a year. Some of you in this room were at our beautiful wedding. I'm convinced that Mom put in a good word to somebody up there. Since our marriage, we've been able to serve in food ministry. We call it yard ministry, where we help people who aren't quite able to do their yard anymore. We love to do their yard work. We've done mission trips here and overseas. We've become snowbirds, avoiding the cold weather. So we leave in December and come back in April. Just this past year, we were able to serve in a very small church in Overton, Nevada. We offered to cater and serve them a meal after their service. For those of you who don't know, John was an executive chef for Marriott for 32 years. So they reluctantly, and they were like, okay, we'll do that. Later, they told us that they had never had a catered meal. They had only had covered dishes, and everybody always brought the same thing. But it was such a blessing for us to serve them. One of the most memorable blessings we've had was in Charleston, South Carolina at Christmas. We had been seeing these banners all through town that said free music, free food, free concert on Christmas afternoon at the Citadel Stadium. We thought, whoa, that sounds like fun to do on Christmas afternoon. We don't have anything else to do. Well, we were immediately greeted by greeters who wanted to know if we had any children that we needed gifts for or any special prayers. We thought, that's kind of odd. We then were ushered to a basement area and offered coffee and donuts. Well, it wasn't very long and we were completely surrounded by people with large shopping bags and that really weren't dressed very nicely. Well, then we were moved upstairs and given lunch, and some church choirs began to sing some Christmas carols. And the minister then got up and began thanking all of the churches for their donations to this event. It was announced that this was the largest homeless event in the Charleston area. So after the songs, we decided we'd leave. Now, we just couldn't walk out the door. We were literally herded through several hallways with men and women's clothes, shoes, socks, underwear, you name it. We were offered it. We kept saying, no, that's okay. No, that's okay. And you could tell, they just didn't understand why we weren't accepting any of their donations. There were times that I wanted to yell, we made a mistake, we're not homeless. When we got back in the car, John and I looked at each other. I started crying. I could remember the time when I would have taken those gifts gladly. I related to him of living in a basement with 2 kids one time, with despair and not much hope of how it was going to get any better. I remembered in 2007 when I received a very nice 6-figure check for a business that I sold, and I showed it to my daughter. She recalled many times in that basement that she found me crying. And I always said, I don't know how we're going to make it, honey, but I know we are. Just hang with me. Attending that homeless event, even though I thought it was an accident, was truly one of the most humbling experiences I've ever had in my entire life. John and I now thank God every day for our blessings of health, wealth, family, and Christian friends. So if I could leave you with any parting thoughts, it would be this. Sometimes when trials, troubles, despair, in the middle of it, you can't see the blessing. But if you keep true to your anchor, keep true to God, those blessings are going to come, whether it be in this life or in our promised eternal life. Thank you.